After dating for 5 years, my fiancé told me he wasn't sure about marrying me. Then he joked in front of his friends, "If you were prettier, I'd marry you." This morning, his mom called me in tears. Dominic and I have been together just over 5 years, engaged for the last 8 months. We met through mutual friends at a housewarming party, two people connecting over a shared disgust for IPAs and a mutual love of 90s cartoons. The relationship built at a comfortable pace, dating for a year, moving in after 2, adopting our cat Beans at 3, and getting engaged last summer. The proposal wasn't grand, just a Saturday morning hike to our favorite lookout, where he nervously fumbled the ring box out of his jacket pocket. I said yes without hesitation. We set the date for this October and have been gradually working through the planning. Mostly me planning while he nodded along. About 3 months ago, Dominic started making odd comments whenever wedding topics came up. Nothing outright negative, just reluctant. When I showed him potential venues, he'd say things like, "That's an awful lot of money for one day," or "Do we really need to invite that many people?" I wrote it off as typical guy behavior or budget anxiety. Then came the delayed responses to my wedding texts. I'd send caterer options and hear back hours later with just "looks fine" or "your call." When I asked if something was wrong, he'd say work was hectic. His construction company had taken on several major projects, so it made sense. Last month, he started spending more time with his work friend Paul Beers after work, games at Paul's place. Nothing alarming on its own, just more frequent than before. When he came home, he seemed somewhere else, checking his phone more, less affectionate. I talked to my best friend Lena about it. She suggested pre-wedding nerves and recommended a date night to reconnect. So last Friday, I made reservations at a new Italian place downtown, put on a dress I hadn't worn in a while, nothing too dressed up, and bought Dominic's favorite beer to have cold in the fridge. The date night went badly. He was distracted all through dinner, barely present in the conversation. When I brought up locking in honeymoon plans, he dropped it on me. He wasn't sure he was ready for all this. Not just the honeymoon, the wedding, marriage, everything. I was floored. 5 years together, 8 months engaged, and now he wasn't sure. When I pushed him, he mentioned conversations with Paul about how marriage changes people and brought up Paul's brother's painful divorce. The conversation escalated quickly, me trying not to make a scene while feeling like the floor was giving way. We barely touched our food. The drive home was quiet and airless. Back at the apartment, he dodged further conversation, said he needed time to think, and slept on the couch. The next morning was stilted and strange. We moved around each other like strangers who'd just booked the same Airbnb. He mentioned heading to the Rusty Nail with Paul and some work friends to catch the game. I was too drained to push back. A few hours later, Lena called and got me out of the apartment. We grabbed coffee and I unloaded everything. She listened, suggested maybe this was normal pre-wedding anxiety. After coffee, we drifted around Target aimlessly, my standard stress ritual. I picked up throw pillows I didn't need and some new shampoo, because retail therapy counts. By early evening, I'd settled a bit and decided to head back. I was pulling into the complex when a text came in from Kylar, one of Dominic's coworkers I'd met at the company Christmas party. It asked if I was okay, mentioned things had gotten strange at the Rusty Nail. I called instead of texting back. He sounded uncomfortable, reluctant at first. With some gentle pressing, he finally told me what happened. The guys had been giving Dominic a hard time about wedding planning, and when Paul asked if he was ready to commit to one woman forever, Dominic expressed doubts about the timing. When Paul pressed further, Dominic, apparently fairly drunk, said something like, "If you were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying you," then laughed it off as a joke. Kylar said he and a few others called Dominic out, but Dominic got defensive and claimed they couldn't take a joke. I sat in my car and cried for 20 minutes after that call. The man I'd loved for 5 years, who I believed loved me back, had publicly used my appearance as the punchline for why he was hesitant to marry me. When I finally went inside, Dominic was passed out on the couch in the clothes he'd worn out. The apartment smelled like stale beer. I took Beans into the bedroom with me and locked the door. Sunday morning, I woke to coffee and bacon, Dominic's standard apology move. He looked hungover and guilty, clearly hoping food would smooth things over. When I told him what Kylar had shared, his expression fell. He tried to minimize it, said he was drunk and being an idiot. According to him, the guys were ragging on him about being tied down, and he'd said something stupid to deflect. His guys will be guys defense made everything worse. We argued over how he could humiliate me in front of his friends, with him insisting it wasn't intentional. He tried explaining he was overwhelmed by wedding costs and pressure, but I couldn't get past the fact that he'd made my appearance the joke. I couldn't stay in the apartment. I grabbed my purse and went to Elliot's. My brother has always been the steady place I go when things fall apart. When I told him, he was furious, ready to drive over immediately. I talked him down, explained I just needed space and somewhere to be while I figured things out. Through Sunday, Dominic kept texting apologies and asking me to come home and talk. I responded once, saying I needed time. I called in sick Monday, couldn't face answering phones at the dental office like everything was fine. Around 9 Monday morning, Valerie called, Dominic's mom. We've always gotten along genuinely. Well, she's been more supportive of our relationship than my own mother, who lives in Florida with husband number 3. She sounded distressed, said Dominic had called her Sunday night and there was something important I needed to hear. She asked if we could meet. And that's where I am right now, parked outside a coffee shop, 15 minutes early to meet Valerie, wondering what else there is to know, and whether a 5-year relationship is actually finished. I never imagined writing something like this. I keep looking at my engagement ring and wondering if I missed the signs. Was I blind? Or did things shift that fast? Should I hear Valerie out? What could she possibly tell me that would make any of this okay? First update. Thank you for the overwhelming response to my original post. I didn't expect thousands of comments. I've been reading between crying sessions and stress eating my brother's emergency Oreos. For those asking, yes, I met with Valerie, and I'll get there by the end of this update. A lot has happened in 2 days and I'm still moving through it. After posting Monday, I called in sick again. My boss was understanding I've barely used any sick days this year and apparently sounded terrible on the phone. I spent most of the morning in Elliot's spare room/storage closet, reading your comments and trying to collect myself. Around noon, Lena stopped by on her lunch break with sandwiches from a deli near her hospital. I hadn't eaten much since Sunday, so even without any appetite, I forced a few bites. Lena gently reminded me I couldn't avoid Dominic indefinitely. We lived together, shared accounts, and at some point would have to talk. She was right. I couldn't camp at Elliot's forever, especially since his girlfriend was coming for dinner. The last thing I needed was to be the sad third wheel at Taco Tuesday. After Lena left, I showered, borrowed one of Elliot's hoodies, don't judge. It was comforting, and drove back to the apartment. I rehearsed the whole drive over. No yelling, no crying, calm, mature, get answers. When I pulled into the parking spot, Dominic's truck was there. He should have been at work. My stomach knotted as I climbed the stairs. I unlocked the door to find him on the couch in sweats, looking like he hadn't slept, surrounded by the wedding planning binders I'd put together over the past 8 months. Beans was curled up next to him, the tiny traitor. He looked surprised and relieved. When I asked why he wasn't at work, he said he'd taken personal time. He'd apparently been going through all the wedding plans, trying to understand how he'd gotten things so wrong. I stayed near the door, not ready to sit beside him, and told him that reviewing wedding plans wasn't the same as fixing what he'd said. What followed was a long, difficult conversation. He apologized again for the bar comment, called it unforgivable, said he didn't even believe what he'd said. When I asked why he'd say something he didn't believe, he told me he was trying to look cool in front of the guys, which made me angrier, not less. I brought up his comments at dinner, before the bar, when he'd expressed doubts while completely sober. He admitted to being overwhelmed by several things at once: a work project behind schedule, Paul's constant anti-marriage commentary, anxiety about the wedding budget, but instead of telling me any of it, he'd compressed everything until it exploded in the worst way imaginable. As the conversation went on, he mentioned something new, a fear of becoming his father. Dominic rarely talked about his dad, who left at 12 after an affair with a coworker and relocated to Arizona with a new family. He'd always claimed it didn't affect him much, but he confessed now that he was terrified of some inherited tendency toward the same choices. I pointed out he wasn't his father, and that genetics don't write our relationship decisions. His response said a lot. He wondered if he could genuinely promise forever when forever had looked so fragile in what he'd witnessed growing up. When I asked whether he'd talked to anyone about these fears, he admitted he'd been opening up to Kylar occasionally. They'd gotten closer since Kylar joined the company, and Kylar had been through something similar in his own relationship. This explained why Kylar had called me after the bar. He already knew about Dominic's doubts. The conversation turned harder when I asked him directly to describe what he'd been feeling. He was honest, scared, overwhelmed, uncertain about marriage even while loving me. He explained he kept picturing how his parents had seemed fine until they weren't, and he was afraid we'd become the same story. When I asked why he hadn't said any of this sooner, he said he was scared I'd read it as not loving me enough. The irony wasn't subtle. By concealing his fears, he'd produced exactly what he was afraid of. When I asked whether the appearance joke reflected something real about how he felt physically, he insisted that wasn't it. He brought up our first night meeting at the housewarming, remembered the green sweater I was wearing, laughed at himself about his beer pong form. He said the comment came from insecurity and a terrible attempt to seem in control rather than overwhelmed in front of his friends. But then I asked the most important question. Were his doubts about marriage in general, or about marrying me specifically? The pause before he answered told me what I needed to know. He admitted that while his fears were mostly about commitment as a concept, part of him had been wondering whether we were actually right for each other long term. That hurt more than the appearance comment. 5 years together and he was still questioning whether we fit? When I pressed for details, he mentioned how much we'd each changed since our early 20s. My need for structure versus my old spontaneity, his shelved dream of running his own business. I pointed out that growth is normal in relationships. He questioned whether we'd grown alongside each other or in separate directions. I was emotionally hollowed out by this point. I told him I needed distance to process all of it, the public humiliation, the hidden doubts, and now the compatibility question. He asked about therapy, couples counseling, but I held firm on needing space first. As I started gathering clothes, he mentioned my phone had been ringing. I checked and found 3 missed calls from Valerie. With everything happening, I'd completely forgotten we were supposed to meet. When I told Dominic, something shifted in his expression, confusion, then worry. He asked what his mom wanted, and I explained she'd called crying Sunday morning, saying something important had come up after his call to her the night before. The color left his face. He wouldn't look at me. When I asked what he'd told her, he gave me a vague answer about their disagreement and his doubts. His evasiveness made me suspicious. When I pushed harder, he said it wasn't his place to explain and that I should hear it from her directly. I stepped away and called Valerie back. She picked up immediately, worried I hadn't shown for our meeting. I told her I was at the apartment with Dominic. She said she had something important to tell me and suggested meeting right away. Something in her voice when I mentioned Dominic made me more suspicious. After arranging to meet in 30 minutes, I went back to Dominic and asked directly what his mother knew that I didn't. He finally looked at me, something between guilt and surrender on his face. He said there was something he should have told me himself, suggested I hear it from his mom, and offered to be gone by the time I returned if that's what I needed. I packed quickly a week's worth of clothes, toiletries, my laptop. At the door, Dominic said he loved me. I told him sometimes love isn't sufficient on its own. On the way to meet Valerie, Karina called. Dominic's sister, clearly shaken, asked what was going on between us. She mentioned hearing from Paul about the bar, said Dominic wasn't answering her texts while their mom seemed upset. When I told her I was headed to meet Valerie, she sounded surprised and asked if this was about Maria. The name landed like something dropped. What about Maria? I said. Karina's reaction, the quick backpedaling, the apology told me she'd accidentally surfaced something significant. She urged me to just hear Valerie out, wouldn't say more despite my pressing. Pulling into the coffee shop parking lot, I spotted Valerie already seated by the window, red-rimmed, puffy eyes. Whatever she was about to tell me, it was going to change something. My phone buzzed with a text as I walked toward her. Dominic, whatever my mom tells you, please remember that I do love you. I just got scared and made terrible mistakes. I'll understand if you can't forgive me. I put my phone away, took a breath, and sat down across from Valerie. Second update. Thank you for the support on previous posts. Reading your comments has been both comforting and a lot to take in. I haven't responded to many, but I've read them. I'm writing this from a new location, Lena's apartment. After meeting with Valerie yesterday, going back to Elliot's or our apartment felt impossible. Lena has a pull-out couch slightly more comfortable than Elliot's storage room futon, and her cat Pepper doesn't judge me for crying into cereal at 2 a.m. So the meeting with Valerie. Where do I even start? The coffee shop was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. A nearby community college had just let out and students with laptops had claimed most of the tables. Valerie had secured a corner booth with high backs that offered at least the sense of privacy. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her, our monthly family dinner 3 weeks ago. Her usual neat bob was a little disheveled, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. In 5 years, I'd never once seen Valerie without at least mascara and lipstick. It's not vanity, just her routine, the way some people can't start the day without coffee. When I arrived, she stood and hugged me. She smelled like the lavender dryer sheets she always uses. I ordered black coffee, even though what I actually wanted was something absurdly sweet with extra whipped cream. It felt wrong to order something frivolous for this conversation. After a few minutes of strained small talk, Valerie said what she'd come to say. Dominic had called her Sunday night in a complete meltdown. While she acknowledged his fears about commitment and becoming his father were genuine, there was something more immediate driving his behavior. Maria. I nearly choked. Maria? The new project coordinator at Dominic's company? The woman he'd mentioned once or twice in passing? Valerie explained, tearing a napkin into smaller and smaller pieces as she spoke, that Dominic had developed feelings for Maria over the past few months. Nothing physical, she said. At least that's what Dominic had told her. But there was an emotional connection that had him questioning everything about us. I sat there trying to take this in while the coffee shop seemed to shift sideways. While Valerie kept talking, I was mentally constructing a timeline. Maria had joined the company around New Year's. I'd briefly met her at the holiday party in March. By then, Dominic had already started acting different. More withdrawn, constantly checking his phone, spending more time with coworkers. What I'd attributed to project stress now looked like something else entirely. When I asked why Valerie was telling me this rather than protecting her son, her eyes filled up. She began connecting it to her own marriage before Dominic's father left for Arizona with his coworker. There had been months of increasing distance, cutting remarks, deliberate manufactured conflict. All of it designed to create space rather than admit the truth. She didn't want to see the same pattern play out with me kept in the dark while Dominic chose the easier path. The bar comment suddenly made a different kind of sense. Not purely drunk stupidity, but possibly a subconscious attempt to blow up the relationship so he wouldn't have to make a clear decision himself. We sat there for over an hour. Valerie shared more about what she'd lived through trying to save a marriage after learning about the affair, blaming herself for not being enough. Before we said goodbye in the parking lot, she offered something that stayed with me. The hardest lesson I took from all that was that you can't make someone choose you. They either do or they don't. Everything in between is just delay. I sat in my car for a long stretch afterward, staring at my phone. 3 new texts from Dominic, all variations of I'm sorry and I love you. Not one mention of Maria. Still not telling me the whole truth. Instead of responding, I called Lena and asked if I could come stay with her. She didn't hesitate or ask anything, just said she was already pulling out the couch and offered to grab dinner on her way home. That's the friend everyone needs when things collapse. I texted Dominic finally. I know about Maria. Don't contact me again until you're willing to tell me the full truth. I'll be getting more of my things tomorrow while you're at work. Then I blocked his number. Not forever, just for that night. I needed to think without his justifications landing in my ear. On the way to Lena's, Karina called. The conversation confirmed what Valerie had told me, and added more. She'd overheard Dominic and Paul talking about it last Thursday, confronted her brother, made him promise to come clean after the weekend. He hadn't kept that promise. What surprised me most was how firmly Karina stood with me. Despite being his sister, she made it clear she was on my side. The relief that came with that was enormous. I'd been terrified of losing not just Dominic but the family that had become mine over 5 years. Lena's apartment was exactly the neutral ground I needed. We ate Thai food on her living room floor. Her coffee table was buried under papers from her online classes. We put on a baking competition that neither of us actually tracked. The pure ordinariness of it was like something to hold on to in the middle of chaos. After Lena went to bed, I stayed up scrolling back through 5 years of photos on my phone. Vacations, holidays, random ordinary Tuesday selfies. Our engagement photos showed us both grinning like we couldn't believe our luck. I was mentally organizing tomorrow, going to the apartment while Dominic was at work, packing more of my things. Maybe speaking to the landlord about the lease when my phone showed a message from an unknown number. Margot, this is Maria. I know you blocked Dominic. Can we meet tomorrow? There's more you should know. Just the 2 of us. I stared at it for what felt like much longer than it probably was. What else could there be? And why would she reach out directly? After a while, I typed back. Where and when? Third update. Thank you for the continued support on my posts. I've been reading comments during sleepless stretches, and they've helped more than I could express. For those checking in, I'm getting through it. The meeting with Maria happened, and it was nothing like I'd anticipated. We met at a small breakfast place near the park. Neutral territory felt right. When I arrived, she was already there, scrolling her phone with visible nerves. She looked different from the company party, less put together, more like a real person. Hair in a messy bun, minimal makeup. What struck me immediately was how genuinely uncomfortable she seemed. If she'd been involved in some secret emotional connection with my fiancé, shouldn't she have had more composure? Instead, she kept fiddling with her coffee cup, struggling with eye contact. 2 major things came out of that meeting. First, Maria had no idea Dominic had developed feelings for her until Paul mentioned it offhandedly last week. According to her, she and Dominic had been colleagues on a project, texting occasionally about work, but nothing that crossed any line from her side. She hadn't flirted, hadn't encouraged anything beyond professional friendliness. She showed me their message, history, work, logistics, the occasional meme, nothing romantic. She also had a boyfriend of 3 years who sometimes came along to group happy hours. The second revelation was about Paul. He'd apparently been actively stoking things. Maria had overheard him encouraging Dominic to keep his options open before settling down, specifically framing Maria as someone who gets him better than I do. She told me Paul had been sharing with people at work that Dominic was having cold feet, joking about him being trapped, pushing the idea that he was giving up his freedom. By the time the conversation ended, I felt oddly calm. Maria wasn't who I'd imagined. She was a bystander tangled up in Paul's interference and Dominic's internal spiral. Before we parted, she said something that stuck. "You seem like someone who knows what she's worth. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I walked out of that breakfast with clearer eyes and a direction. This wasn't only about Dominic and me anymore. It was about Paul's role, Dominic's unresolved history, and where I genuinely stood in the middle of all of it. I texted Karina, asked if she'd help set up a gathering at her place neutral ground, since I wasn't ready to be alone with Dominic yet. She agreed immediately. Which brings me to last night's dinner. Karina had arranged everything in her small, warm apartment. She'd ordered pasta and salad from an Italian place nearby. Nothing elaborate. Valerie arrived first. Then Paul Karina had made his attendance non-negotiable, and finally Dominic, who looked like he hadn't properly slept in days. The first 20 minutes were almost unbearable. We all sat around Karina's dining table, nudging food around our plates, filling the silence with awkward fragments about the weather and Karina's new coffee table. The thing nobody wanted to name sat in the middle of the room, taking up all the air. Valerie finally broke it, saying plainly that we weren't there to socialize but to face what had been happening and work out where to go from here. That was the opening. I shared what Maria had told me, watching Paul's expression carefully as I spoke. The way it shifted from confusion to defensiveness said everything. He tried to interject, claimed he was just looking out for his friend, but Karina shut that down immediately. Dominic sat mostly in silence, staring at the pasta he'd barely touched. When addressed directly, he admitted that Maria had just been friendly, that he'd built something out of it in his own head because he was scared of becoming his father. Valerie visibly flinched at that. When I brought up the bar comment, Dominic looked genuinely ashamed. He said it had nothing to do with Maria, he was just being a coward. Paul had been making him feel cornered and weak, and instead of standing up for our relationship, he'd said something awful to seem like he wasn't trapped. He said it was never about how I looked. Paul tried to wave it off as harmless guy talk, but Karina pointed out that Dominic and I were supposed to be getting married in 3 months. That landed physically. The save the dates were out. Deposits had cleared. My dress was in Lena's spare closet waiting for its final fitting. That's when I said quietly that I didn't think the wedding was going to happen. The room went silent. Dominic started to object, and I stopped him. I told them all what the past week had made clear. This wasn't just about Maria, or the joke, or even Paul's poisonous influence on Dominic. It was about Dominic not being honest with me or with himself. I'd been ignoring the signs for months. The withdrawal from wedding planning, the increasing time with Paul, the emotional distance. I'd made excuses because confronting it felt harder than explaining it away, but I deserved someone who didn't need a family intervention to sort out how he felt about me. Paul made a comment about me being dramatic, and both Valerie and Karina shut him down simultaneously. Dominic insisted he was certain he loved me, just too scared of failing. I told him he'd already made that happen. The conversation went on for hours. Tears, hard truths, heated exchanges, especially between Karina and Paul. Old wounds, new ones. Around midnight, when everyone was exhausted, we landed somewhere we all recognized. The wedding wasn't happening. Our 5-year relationship had reached its end, not through a shouting match or a dramatic exit, through the quiet, devastating recognition that something essential had cracked. Trust. Maybe it could eventually be repaired, but not in time for an October wedding. Not with Maria still at the same company. Not with that joke still echoing. Karina drove me back to Lena's place after, assuring me that whatever happened with Dominic wouldn't change things between her, Valerie, and me. She said I was still family to them regardless. When I got back to Lena's, I sat on the pullout in the dark and let it settle over me. 5 years. Gone. Wedding. Cancelled. Future. Unknown. I didn't cry immediately. Instead, I made a list in my phone's notes. Call venue. Deposit probably lost. Return the ring. Reach out to guests. Figure out the apartment. Update social media. Ugh. It was past 2 when Lena came out. She'd heard me come in and wanted to check. When I told her the wedding was off, she sat down beside me and put her arm around my shoulders. We stayed like that until the sun came up, barely speaking, just existing in the strange new shape of things. This morning I woke to a text from Dominic asking if we could meet to handle logistics. The lease, finances, the furniture. So adult, so final. There was also a message from Elliot asking when to come help pack. My brother, always practical. And one from my mom, who'd apparently heard through cousins who follow Karina on Instagram, wanting to know whether to cancel her flight for the wedding. The ring feels different now. I've been absently turning it on my finger without realizing it. It's simple round diamond, white gold, nothing ornate. Dominic chose it because it was classic, like what we had. The irony. I called the venue this morning. The coordinator was kind but clear. The deposit is gone, non-refundable this close to the date. $8,000. Over a year of cutting back on trips and clothes and dinners out. The practical part of me recoils. The emotional part doesn't have bandwidth for money right now. Karina texted that she found a photographer willing to transfer our deposit to a future event. Valerie offered to handle cancellation calls to family so I wouldn't have to navigate those conversations. Small kindnesses in the rubble. Paul, predictably, sent a non-apology about things happening for a reason, and how I'd find someone better eventually. Deleted without a response. Maria sent a short message saying she was sorry about how things unfolded and reiterating that nothing had happened. I believe her. She feels like collateral damage, a convenient screen for Dominic's fears and Paul's manipulation. The hardest part is the ordinary reminders. The wedding planning binder still sitting in my bag. the shared Spotify playlist we'd been building for the reception, the honeymoon research folder on my laptop, small fragments of a future that dissolved. Lena suggested a mental health day from work. I decided to go in anyway. Sitting home, scrolling Reddit and spiraling felt worse than the distraction of answering phones and filing paperwork. My coworkers have been blessedly normal. Either they don't know yet or they're quietly pretending not to see my swollen eyes and the missing ring. I'm meeting Dominic tomorrow at a coffee shop to exchange keys and sort out the apartment details. He's agreed to move out since my name is on the lease. He can stay with his cousin temporarily. One more practical conversation in the process of taking apart a relationship. Part of me still can't entirely believe this is the situation. Last month we were debating first dance songs and testing wedding cake. Now we're figuring out who gets the PlayStation and how to divide up the kitchen. Something Valerie said at dinner keeps returning to me. Endings are almost never neat or clean. Most of the time they're messy and sad and layered. She'd know. She rebuilt her life after Dominic's father left, raised 2 kids, found her way to happiness eventually. Looking at her now, you'd never guess she'd been through anything so heavy. Maybe there's something in that. For now, I'm just moving through one day at a time. Tomorrow is the apartment and money. Next week, I'll start looking for my own place. Beyond that, it's blurry, but it does exist. Karina texted earlier asking if I'd want to meet for coffee this weekend. She mentioned a family friend of theirs, an older gentleman named Kenzo, has offered his vacation cabin if I need somewhere quiet to land. The support from Dominic's family has been unexpected and genuinely meaningful. I haven't decided about the cabin. Part of me craves somewhere quiet to process. Part of me needs the people I know around me right now. Lena, with her grounded compassion. Elliot with his steadiness. Even Valerie and Karina with their complicated kind of loyalty. What I do know is that I won't be checking the wedding countdown app anymore. Won't be saving venue ideas. Won't be practicing writing my name differently. That future is gone. And while I can't picture yet what comes next, I'm beginning to believe there will be something. Last update. It feels strange writing this from my new apartment. It's been 3 months since the dinner where my engagement ended. 3 months of reassembling a life in directions I didn't foresee. Some of you have been asking for an update, so here it is: the good, the difficult, and the unexpected. First, the logistics. Dominic moved out of our shared apartment within a week of the breakup. Elliot and Lena helped pack his things while he was at work, leaving them labeled neatly in the living room for him to collect. It was disorienting separating 5 years of shared existence into his and mine. The coffee maker he got for his birthday. The blanket I bought on that weekend trip to the mountain town. All the framed photos that covered the walls. The apartment felt hollow after, like scenery without a production. I lasted 2 more weeks before the lease manager agreed to let me break the contract for an extra month's payment, worth every cent to escape the residue of the relationship in every corner. Finding something new was harder than I'd expected. The rental market is brutal, and my budget as a single person is tighter than I'd realized. I landed in a smaller 1-bedroom across town, further from work, but with a small balcony where I've started growing herbs in dollar store pots. The basil keeps dying, but the mint refuses to quit. I've decided to read that as meaningful. Financially, everything shifted. All the shared costs landed on me alone. Car insurance, streaming, even groceries cost more when you're cooking for one. I've become the person with a coupon app who buys store brands and tracks spending in a spreadsheet, adulting in ways I didn't anticipate at 29. The wedding vendors were mostly gracious. The venue kept the deposit but sent a warm note. The florist returned half the payment even without being required to. The DJ suggested his brother, who does therapy work, an odd but thoughtful gesture. The engagement ring is in its original box in my dresser drawer. Dominic said to keep it or sell it. Said it would be bad karma to take it back. I haven't made a decision. Some days I forget it's there. Other days I open the box and sit with it, trying to understand how something so small carried so much weight. Social media had its own particular cruelty. I waited 2 weeks before changing my status, dreading the response. When I finally did it, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the notifications came anyway. Well-meaning friends with what happened, messages. Distant relatives offering prayers. Former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years, sliding into my DMs with concern that felt more like curiosity. I posted a brief, vague statement about mutual choices, and requested privacy, muted everything, and put my phone face down across the room. Later I posted a single photo of my new apartment keys with the caption, "New Beginnings." Fewer likes than the engagement announcement, but it felt more honest. Now Dominic. We've spoken a handful of times since the breakup, almost always about practical things. A piece of mail arriving at the wrong address. The shared cloud storage we forgot to unsync. Returning his sister's borrowed air fryer. Each conversation has been polite but guarded, like 2 people who once knew each other being forced into a brief elevator ride. He's still at the same company, still connected to Paul, though Karina tells me there's been some friction there lately, still staying at his cousin's. According to Karina, things became awkward with Maria after the breakup. She requested a transfer to a different team, and has been distant with him since finding out the full story. The most surprising development came last month when Dominic texted asking if we could meet. We hadn't seen each other since the key exchange, and part of me was curious what he wanted. We met at a coffee shop near my new place. Neutral ground with plenty of people around, as Lena half-jokingly recommended. He looked different, thinner, darker circles. A shirt I didn't recognize. The first 10 minutes were awkward small talk about work and weather. Then he took out a journal. "I've been seeing someone," he said, and my heart did something strange. Before he added, "A therapist, I mean." The journal was part of the therapy work, daily reflections on patterns he wanted to understand and change. He'd been working through his father's departure, his dynamic with Paul, the way he'd treated me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or a second chance. He just wanted me to know he was doing the work. "I should have started years ago," he said. "Maybe things would have been different." It was the most honest I'd ever seen him, and I found myself genuinely hoping the therapy helps not for my sake, that chapter's closed, but because carrying that much unprocessed family history looked exhausting. Before we said goodbye, he mentioned hearing I was still close with his mom and sister. "I'm glad," he said. "They need good people around them." That's been one of the stranger parts of this, maintaining real connections with Dominic's family while stepping away from Dominic. Valerie texts weekly, usually memes or garden updates. Karina and I meet for breakfast every other Sunday at a diner between our places. They've been careful not to put me in uncomfortable positions or overshare about him, respecting the lines I've drawn. As for me, I'd love to report a tidy awakening. Some through line where heartbreak became transformation. The reality is more uneven than that. Some days I feel something close to relief, grateful I didn't marry someone who could wound me that casually. Other days, usually when the hot water heater misbehaves or I can't reach something on a high shelf, I miss the ordinary comfort of having a partner. I started therapy too, not specifically for the breakup, but because it helped me see how much I'd adjusted myself within that relationship, how many warning signs I'd filed under familiar and left there, how much space I'd quietly surrendered to accommodate Dominic's fears. My therapist suggested reclaiming things I'd quietly let go of. I've started hiking on Saturday mornings again, something I'd stopped because Dominic hated early weekend wake-ups. Dating feels distant as a concept, though coworkers have started hints about someone they think I should meet. I'm not there yet. Maybe in a few months. Maybe longer. Right now, I'm still learning to be at ease with my own company. The most unexpected thing came from what should have been the saddest task, canceling the honeymoon. We'd booked 10 days at a coastal cottage with a deck overlooking the water. Non-refundable, obviously. I avoided the calendar reminder for weeks. Then Lena proposed something I hadn't considered: take the trip anyway. Alone. You've never traveled by yourself, she pointed out. Maybe it's the moment. It terrified me initially. 10 days in a romantic cottage built for two? By myself? It sounded like the opening of a melancholy short film. But the more I considered it, the more the appeal grew. Wake up whenever I wanted. Explore without negotiating. Read an entire book in one sitting. So that's where I'm going next week. The same honeymoon cottage, solo trip. I've packed 3 books, downloaded podcasts, and bought a swimsuit I chose entirely for comfort rather than how it looked to anyone else. My mom thinks I've lost my mind. Elliot offered to come for part of it. I said no. Karina suggested downloading a dating app just to browse. Maybe. Probably not. I don't know what I'll find on this solo non-honeymoon. Maybe clarity. Maybe more questions. Almost certainly some sunburn knowing my relationship with sunscreen. The other day I was grocery shopping when a song we'd claimed as ours came through the store speakers. 3 months ago that would have sent me into the freezer aisle trying to breathe. This time I felt a small ache. The way you feel when you press a bruise that's nearly done healing. Progress, not completion. I won't pretend I have it figured out. The shower temperature in the new apartment is unpredictable. I killed another basil plant yesterday. I still sometimes pick up my phone to text Dominic something funny before I remember that's not something we do anymore.